Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. أما بعد أحبتي في الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أسأل الله كريم رب العرش العظيم أن يتولنا في الدنيا والآخرة. أحبتي في الله, a question was asked about Tawheed in its categories. And Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdulaziz al-Mani', he answered this question in light of the aqsam or the divisions that some of the scholars of Ahl al Sunnah in the past have mentioned, from Ibn al-Qayyim wa ghayrihi. And some of the scholars, they classify Tawheed, and prior to them, of course, the Salaf, Tawheed in two categories and some in three categories. It's generally what is known. And we're going to try to explain this according to what the Sheikh said. So he says, with regards to the three categories of Tawheed, he says, أما Tawheed هو إفراد المعبود بالعبادة. He says, as for Tawheed, monotheism, it is to single out the one who is worshipped with worship. مع الاعتقاد وحدته ذاتا. By also through believing in his oneness, in his self, meaning his essence. His essence is oneness, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sifat, and his attributes. Wa af'alan, and his the actions that he does, subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَا تَقْبَلُوا ذَاتُهُ الْإِنْقِسَامِ بِوَجْهٍ. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself is not divided from himself in any way. Meaning, as Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah mentions about that the that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the that and the sifat, la yanfaq a sifat min that. Or that basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine attributes are not separate from himself. Okay, so you can't say, so that's why Ahl al Sunnah wal Jama'ah doesn't say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sifat are created. You know, his divine attributes are created. We don't say the fact that he descends or he ascends as he in a manner that suits his majesty. We don't say that that's created. We say no. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in reality, he descends and he ascends in a manner that suits his majesty. We don't know the kayfiyah. We don't know the how. No. And that's not separate from himself. And even Ahl Bid'ah agree that Allah is not created. And then he says, وَلَا تَشَبِّهْ صِفَاتُهُ صِفَات. And no attributes resemble his attributes. وَلَا تَنْفَقُ عَنَ ذَات. And his sifat, his attributes, are not divided from himself. This is what we just said. وَلَا تَدْخُلُ أَفْعَالَهُ الْإِشْرَاكِ. And his actions, he doesn't share with anyone in his actions, subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَهُوَ خَالِقٌ دُونَ مَا سِوَى. He is the creator, and there is nothing that has, shares in divinity or creates with him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَمَّا عُنْوَاءُهُ فَنَوْعَانِ. And as for its categories, if you will, or its the different types of Tawheed, he mentions that there are two categories of Tawheed. Okay, so the first, we actually didn't talk about the three categories of Tawheed, but they fit in the two categories of Tawheed. And this brings up an important point that I think we need to discuss, and that is that La mashaha fi istilah. That there is no, that if the scholars come up with different categories from following the divine text, the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and the madhab of the Salaf, if they come up with, for example, two categories versus three categories, that doesn't affect the meaning of Tawheed, meaning it does not, those that is from their ijtihadat, and it is coming directly from the divine nusus. It's from their taking from the book and the sunnah, the evidences, and they don't contradict one another. And so no problem if you say two categories, but you mention these two categories that the scholars of the past mentioned, or you mention three categories. And we're going to tell you how they fit in, because I think it's important for the English-speaking audience to have this information. So he says, when it's divided into two categories, he said, and in fact, he didn't even talk about the three categories. He is going to talk about the three within the context of the two. He says, Tawheed, he says it's two types. So he's going with the definition that is well known from, I believe, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and no doubt from Shaykh al-Islam ibn al-Qayyim, because it's mentioned in Mudarij as-Salikin. So he says, Tawheed fi ma'rufati wal-ithbat. Tawheed fil ma'rifati wal-ithbat. The first Tawheed, the first category of Tawheed is Tawheed monotheism with regards to ma'rifah wal ithbat. And we're going to have to explain that, because I've never heard it translated in English, in fact, but I'm sure it's out there. And the second category, wa Tawheed fi talab wal qasd. And the Tawheed, the monotheism regarding the talab wal qasd. And talab meaning to request something, wa qasd meaning intention, or, you could say like the ikhlas here. And we'll tell you how it relates to the categories that are well known to us. And as we said, the first category, when it's two categories, Tawheed fil ma'rifati wal ithbat. Tawheed in ma'rifati, maybe in knowledge, wal ithbat, in affirmation. Okay, and we're going to tell you how this means. So, fil awwal, so when we say Tawheed fil ma'rifati wal ithbat, this is referring to Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, وهو إثبات حقيقة ذات الرب. He said that this refers to Tawheed of the Lordship, divine Lordship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is in reference to the actual affirming the actual reality of the Lord himself, by his own attributes. And that those are things like Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. And for example, Tawheed al-Rububiyyah might be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Khaliq. He is the creator. So this is talking about his that, and there's also a sifa, his sifat, that he creates is taken from that. But this is his name, al-Khaliq, the creator. And so this means that this is a part of his lordship. Okay, this is a part of what we refer to as this Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. And also, it is also known as Tawheed fil ma'rifati wal ithbat. And he also says, wasifati. And so it also includes Tawheed al-Asma'i wa Sifat. Tawheed regarding the divine names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wasifatihi wal asma'ihi wa af'alihi, and the actions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does. وَتُكَلَّمُهِ بِكُتُبِهِ, and his speaking in his books, like the Quran, Kalam Allah, the original Injil, Kalam Allah, speech of Allah. وَتَكْلِيمُهُ لِمَنْ شَاءَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ, and also his speech for whosoever he pleases from his servants. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. وَأَمَّا الثَّانِي, as for the second category, when we divide Tawheed into two categories, this is, as we said, this is Tawheed fi talab wal qasd, okay, which has to do with the requesting and the intention. This is فَهُوَ تَوْحِيدُ الْإِلَهِيَّةِ. This is Tawheed al-Ilahiyya, or also known as Tawheed al-Uluhiyya, or also known as Tawheed al-Ibadah. We also have different names that the scholars have mentioned. وَقَدْ أَرْسَلَ اللَّهُ رَسُولَهُ رسله وأنزل الكتب لتقرير النوع الأول. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent his divine messengers or prophets, his prophets, alayhim afdal salatu wasalam, with this divine message and their books. He sent prophets with books. with the revelation. And they were affirming the first category, Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. وَدَعْوَةِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ إِلَى النَّوْعِ الثَّانِي. And they were calling the people who committed polytheism with the second category, and that would be also what we know as Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, meaning to worship Allah alone. For example, and we're going to give us an example just to make sure we're clear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says في كتابه المبين وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. And we sent to every nation a messenger to worship Allah alone and avoid false deities. So here, in this, we see that this ayah is dalil, is evidence for Tawheed al-Ibadah or Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. Okay? Because here in the ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning that He sent to every nation a messenger to call the Tawheed al-Ibadah and to worship Allah alone. And when you worship Allah alone, that means it's Ibadah. And that is what we refer to as Tawheed al-Ibadah or Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah or Tawheed al-Ilahiyyah. Kama tasha, as you like. Okay? So all of that has to do with actions that we do that show Islamic monotheism, meaning that illustrate Islamic monotheism. That I pray to Allah alone with ikhlas, that is Islamic monotheism. I am implementing Tawheed al-Ibadah. I'm worshiping Allah alone. If I sacrifice something, I am sacrificing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is an action that the servant is doing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as an act of ibadah. So that is a part of Islamic monotheism. And so it shows us that Islamic monotheism, it includes worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, affirming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Lord and the creator and the sustainer and the provider, and also, that it includes this tawheed, this concept of monotheism in Islam. It includes that Allah has divine names and attributes. Hopefully that's clear. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Almighty to accept our good and forgive our evil and have mercy upon the Shaykh and bless him and reward him immensely for the things that he left behind of treasures of the ilm and all the scholars of Islam, from Ahl al Sunnah wal Jama'ah and the pearls that they left behind, so that way we could worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in clarity. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.